we have to be headed more towards a place where we see each other as a human race,
Mhm.
and are comfortable with culture existing differently within that human
Right,
race,
of course.
as opposed to saying, nope, this is my land and these are my borders, and I'm going to decide that I conquered it outright and fair and square, and now
Mhm.
it's, the white man's land or
Right.
what have you. That to me just seems completely unsustainable.
According to reporting by Al Jazeera, at least 9 people have died at the hands of ICE already this year. This includes the 2 high-profile murders of Renee and Alex Pretti, both Minneapolis residents. On today's episode of Local 514, I spoke to Michael Lipset, a Montreal resident who is originally from the Twin Cities, where these 2 high-profile murders occurred. Michael is one of the co-organizers of the ICE Out demonstration held in front of the U.S. consulate here in Montreal on February 1st, 2026. I spoke to Michael about what it means to organize across borders, what solidarity looks like, and how he stays connected to what's going on in the Twin Cities. And unfortunately, there are many ways that Canada, Quebec, and Montreal are complicit in what's going on. My name is Kalden Dhatsenpa. This is Local 514. Today, I'm here with Michael Lipset, one of the organizers of the ICE Out protest, which was held on February 1st. I have Michael on here today to speak a bit about his experience organizing that protest and motivations, intentions behind it. Thank you for coming on today, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Kalden.
Of course, of course. So I guess what I want to know is, what was the moment, I guess, with all the news coming out of Minneapolis, the U.S. at large, right, over the last year of all these ICE raids? What was the moment where you were like, okay, I have to do something?
Uh, that's a good question. I mean, it pains me to say that it was certainly after Alex Pretti was murdered,
No, yeah.
because there were so many other people who also had been abducted inappropriately in a way that violates their constitutional rights. Um, there had also been a number of people of color who had been murdered. Keith Porter Jr. on New Year's Eve in Los Angeles by an off-duty ICE agent, just to name one. But to see in my city somebody summarily executed in the streets by masked federal agents
Mm.
in a space that I had been so many times, a space that I had lived very closely to for many, many years of my life, in a city I grew up in, while the residents of that city had been so actively engaged and involved in resisting the ICE presence there, really indicated to me that we all had to be doing more. I wanted to let my voice be heard. I wanted to join others in making that statement, and really just hopped online to see what actions had already been organized that I could join. But in seeing there were none in Montreal, really kind of felt hurt by that even,
Mm-hmm.
and knew that there were other folks who would also like to have their voices heard on the issue. And so actually, my initial response was just to go by myself and stand in front of the consulate and see who else would show up. Um, and the story of organizing the protest is longer than that, but that's where the motive began.
Okay, okay. And I guess once you actually decided on, organizing this protest, doing something, showing up in front of the U.S. consulate on St. Catherine, I guess, what were the next steps after that? How quickly did things, I guess, snowball in the positive direction in terms of support and connections that were given to you?
Yeah, quite quickly. Actually, the first place I went first to my friend, whom I have known, actually the first person I met in Montreal when I came out here in 2014, to visit my then partner, who was here training her for her circus career. I met a woman named Lynn Worrell, whose parents actually are U.S. citizens. She also is a U.S. citizen and a Canadian citizen. She has an uncle living in Minnesota, and she has been very active across the spectrum of social justice issues, as have I historically. And I reached out to say, look, we've got to do something. She said, yeah, I'm down. And that was about as far as we got in our call. I was very emotional at the time, and so we didn't have a very deep conversation about it. But I just started to take action. I looked at Facebook to see if there are any groups for Americans in Montreal. Found one that clearly said this is not a political space, which, of course, to me raised a bit of a flag, and I dismissed it outright. Applied to be a part of the group, knowing the first thing I would do is post a political call to action. And was given access a couple hours later, and on the wall just wrote, if I show up at the consulate tomorrow, will any of you be there with me? And a handful of folks said yes. And I said, you know what? Handful of folks, I think we can do better. Give me a week at least to see what I can do. And so wrote to them, hang tight. I'm going to give this a week and see what kind of momentum we can build. Put together a graphic event, a Facebook event page, contacted a friend of mine in media who has also had a deep history of activating and organizing in Montreal against issues of racism, class solidarity, class consciousness, and so forth. Language politics as well. And she said, you know what, just do it in front of the consulate, let it be known it's all ages. That'll help keep detractors away. And included all those details in the event. Posted it as co-hosted with my friend Lynn, and then let the folks in the Facebook group know. Shared the link there, and then I reached back out to my friend who's a journalist, and another friend of mine, in fact, who's a journalist over at CBC. And I'm not sure if it was them going to CBC or CBC picking up what they might have, but CBC reached out and invited me for a conversation on their evening news hour, Let's Go. And that was like, if I posted the event Sunday, they reached out Monday. I was on the radio Tuesday. By the time that interview happened, Indivisible Quebec, the Immigrant Workers Center, and Democrats Abroad for McGill had all come on as what I would now consider co-organizing groups. And so, yeah, very quickly, I invited everybody in Montreal that I knew to invite to that Facebook event. And then later, I think Wednesday, posted something on social media just with the info and also a quick reel saying, what I was doing and why, inviting folks to join us. And that went subtly viral, I guess, and took it from there. The rest of the story around like media coalescing and sharing the news and so forth was rather it's sort of like self-explained, because I didn't do much to get that to happen. Like you, for example, reached out independently. All the other news organizations sort of showed up on their own volition. So,
of course, I mean, it's the images coming out of these kinds of raids are just they're arresting. They just completely stop you in your tracks. There's the complete lack of humanity, like you were saying before, right? All these kind of constitutional rights, like ones that are kind of, I would say, classic ones that you expect, like let's say like right wingers to support, like the right to bear arms is kind of being thrown out the window with Alex Pretti having a legal concealed carry kind of taken away from him, thrown out, and then he was shot at least 10 times, right? But it's really great to hear about this kind of quick mobilizing support that came up for the protest.
Yeah, I take no credit for that. It's really the credit is to the people, and I think the credit is to the fact that so many people are able to look at this situation and see that it's wrong and be willing to add their voice to the chorus of resistance.
Have there been any detractors or people who kind of like push back against what you're doing?
Very few.
Okay.
I know that the experience of resistance for folks who are engaged in organizing protests like this on a regular basis is and can be quite strong and quite threatening and scary. In this case, I don't know if it was luck or a byproduct of the many intersecting privileges I hold, but there was like one email after the fact telling me to mind my business from an anonymous who knows who. There was a couple folks on the day of who walked through the protest with their middle fingers up to us, which, I just don't understand. It's like, what then do you stand for? What are you going about your life on a day-to-day doing if you want to defend people murdering folks in the street?
Right.
And then, I think the one thing that was a little unexpected was the fact that there was likely one or two undercover ICE agents at the protest gathering footage of us and us as organizers and the people who were there.
Attending it, right. Because ICE has, as I understand it, offices in Canada, Montreal included.
Yeah, they had their field office inside the consulate.
Right.
I think there was likely folks present.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real risk, I guess, with the way that they use sort of these kinds of like biometric data, right? They kind of surveil people, and I guess what kind of practices would you suggest then for, I guess, the concern of masked agents kind of recording people and taking people's I guess faces and footage of them?
I mean, I think the best practice is anonymity. You can still show up and be masked as a protester. There's nothing against that. Particularly, in Montreal, I'm not sure how the law works around face coverings for religious reasons versus for like warmth, for example, or for health. I know that has historically been a controversial piece of legislation that Quebec has passed, banning religious garb, and particularly targeting folks who practice Islam. But that's my recommendation. It wasn't something that I paid a particularly large amount of attention to for myself this time around, knowing that the values that led me to this protest are not secret. They're values that I try to live out every day. So to your question around, what motivated me to act, it's sort of a nuanced question for me in a certain way, because I try to live on a day-to-day basis in action, right?
Of course.
So for me, it was like, well, what motivated me to take this particular kind of action? And it was generally like the absence of such an opportunity in Montreal. So anonymity, I don't know. I think it's hard to be the organizer and be anonymous.
Of course, yeah.
And you have to expect there to be issues, to be obstacles when you're standing up against the powers that be, right? That has always been the case. There's a risk.
Are you concerned about your person having been filmed, like them filming you and being able to identify you?
I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that.
No problem.
At the moment.
No problem.
For a number of personal reasons. But yeah, it was, I will say it was not an element of the day that I had chosen to give a ton of attention to.
Sure. You're from St. Paul. How are you still connected to what's going on out there, acts of resistance? I'm kind of curious about how you stay in touch with what's happening on the ground there.
Yeah, I mean, my whole family's still there, except my mother is there part-time. So I also have a lot of work there still. I work with a school that is almost a 30-year-old public school in St. Paul, very unique school called the High School for Recording Arts. And so, my colleagues are all still there. A lot of the young people I work with are there. It's easy to stay in touch. My life is connected to the Twin Cities. So, everyone I follow on social media, not everyone, but a lot of the folks that I follow, my friends historically are still there. It wasn't hard. And it was also that the nature of my life in that aspect is part of obviously what led me to organize this action, not in the sense that I'm still deeply connected, but in the sense that after Alex Pretti was killed, after Renee Good was killed, it is all I would see or hear about. And when that is the thing you're confronted with every hour of the day, it, at least for me, really pushed me to a place where I felt like in order to be okay, I needed to do more.
It was sort of inescapable, I guess.
It was very inescapable. And in the process of organizing this protest and talking to folks like you, I've said many times that hope is a practice. And so to feel hopeless told me I needed to be practicing hopeful action more. And protest certainly is that.
What are some hopeful things you're hearing out of the Twin Cities?
Oh, man. I mean, there's so many hopeful things out of the Twin Cities. And I'm glad you asked. Thank you for asking, because a lot of the narrative is like the negativity that ICE is bringing to the Twin Cities. But a lot of the beauty is just right there on its face in the opposition to it, right? There's neighbors picking folks up, dropping folks off to and from work, kids to and from school or extracurricular activities. My sister's been engaged in a lot of that. My stepmother has been stepping up to deliver groceries to folks, engage in mutual aid drives. People are setting up, I'm sure folks have heard about the Signal chats to run ICE license plates and keep a database of ICE vehicles and be able to track in real time where ICE officers are at. I have heard recently that people have started housing families, much in the same way that people did in the Underground Railroad for so many centuries, so many decades. People did in Nazi Germany, which is scary. I think that people don't realize that actually since Greg Bovino shipped out, was demoted, and Tom Homan came in, the pressure has not relented whatsoever. And in the face of that pressure, all the things that had been practiced up to a certain point are still being practiced and more. So people are setting up blockades at certain intersections that are heavily trafficked.
People being
residents.
Residents, okay.
Yeah, blockades to ICE, right? Like they're literally cordoning off certain neighborhoods so as to prevent ICE from entering. And then manning or stationing, I should say, those blockades so as to allow residents only to come and go. I don't know how that's going. It seems like it could bring some ire based on the legality or illegality of it. But there's so much work happening. I really have appreciated some of the stories that have come out around Smitten Kitten, a sex shop in Uptown that has both remained open as a body positive sex shop, but also a space for folks to go get groceries, diapers, other toiletries, things that are of serious need in times like this.
Lots of hope. Lots of ways that people are coming together to.
Then the Nation just nominated. I don't know how legit this is, because I don't know if the Nation as a news outlet can nominate folks or anybody, anything for a Nobel Prize, but they did nominate the Twin Cities, Minneapolis in particular, for a Nobel Peace Prize. And then, of course, the biggest general strike in 70 or 80 years in the U.S., in the whole country, was in the Twin Cities, and something like 80,000 people showed up. And then a week later, as many people showed up again for another protest. So, the Twin Cities have always held a special place in my heart, and even more so now, I think.
No, of course. I feel like when I'm looking at this, there's so many things converging, right, on the Twin Cities. Like, I mean, the fact that you see this reaction against it, that's not just, I guess, like isolated acts of resistance, but actually like a real coming together through this kind of collective organizing, right? Through like mutual aid, through these blockades, all these things that take collective resources, especially something like a general strike, to me shows signs of a very healthy, active kind of resistance to it. But I need to ask, I guess, how do you understand how things came to this point, right? Why Minneapolis? Why was it that the murders of Renee Good and Alex Pretti happened there?
I don't think I could tell you why Renee Good and Alex Pretti happened in the Twin Cities, except to say that the history of resistance in the Twin Cities dates back quite a ways. There are so many names that could be named, but I think the ones that come to mind in terms of folks who've been killed by the police, first and foremost, Philando Castile, a Black father who was in his car with a weapon that was licensed and registered and not in his hands, and he told the police he had it, was then shot to death very violently on camera in front of his, I think, 4-year-old daughter and her mother at the time. And that predated George Floyd's murder, who, the story of whom I think everybody knows at this point. And that kicked off an international movement of anti-racism. And it was Minneapolis that was really the site and the spark of that. And I think it was a movement. It was definitely, obviously, under Trump's first administration, his first presidency, and very much in opposition to the kinds of messages his administration stands for. And so when that happened and people went straight to the 3rd precinct, which is the precinct from which the police who killed George Floyd came, and burned it to the ground, and the following uprising occurred across the Twin Cities in a way that was clearly anti-capitalist, people burning down, corporate businesses and others in the process, to make a statement that if the Black community is going to be violently hunted by the police industrial complex of the Twin Cities, then nobody is going to be immune from feeling that violence. Trump took it personally, and it was a big scar on his first administration, and he did not handle it well, obviously. And so I think there's a certain level of retribution. And I think when they came into the Twin Cities, they were waiting for an excuse to come to the Twin Cities, it seems, because the thing that brought them there was a right-wing influencer's video that was completely unverified, claiming millions of dollars of fraud from a particular daycare, right? And it turns out that perhaps there was a certain amount of fraud in that area of daycare subsidies.
In Minneapolis?
In the Twin Cities, yeah. And therefore, Governor Walz recognized it. He stepped down. But ultimately, the point being that it feels like the force with which folks came into the Twin Cities, with which ICE came into the Twin Cities, was in particular a reflection upon the history of the Twin Cities under the first Trump administration and the kind of reactionary or even vengeful response that he may have wanted to have
to quell the kind of resistance that's been present there during his first administration.
I think he and his cronies likely knew the kind of resistance that was possible, right? And we know now they were really given a blank check to use whatever kind of force they wanted. Steve Miller came on TV throughout many times to say, you can do whatever you want. You have federal immunity. You are protected. Did it again after Renee Good and Alex Pretti were killed. And then they even labeled both of them domestic terrorists in the most inhumane way an administration could come for victims of federal violence. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's been very clear that there is more to the ICE presence in the Twin Cities. And I think that shouldn't be like a shocking statement, right? There's more than immigration and customs enforcement that's going on there.
Yeah. I mean, something I hear is that they're asking for voter rolls as well. They want to be able to identify people who might be opposed to Trump, I guess.
Yeah, they're blackmailing the Minnesotan government by saying, we'll remove ICE if you give us your voter rolls. Yeah. Pam Bondi said that directly. It's wild.
Could you have ever known this was coming to this extent?
I'm not gonna claim to be a, what's the word? Like prescient. Yeah, prescient by any means. But I think that the project of the United States in some ways is unsustainable. If you ask how we got here in the Twin Cities, and we just want to talk about like, how did we get to a place where ICE under Trump 2.0 is doing what it's doing? That sort of goes back to the history of resistance in the last 10 or so years. But if we want to talk about how we got here as a country, how the U.S. got to where it is as a country, you got to go back to 1619, right? Which is like the year the first boat full of enslaved people showed up on the shores of what was then largely Mexico, right? And to know that the United States is a colonial project built on colonial values of the theft of land, the theft of labor, the theft of lives, in order to accelerate capital gain for what then was a young nation, what now is still a young nation. I think this is the 250th anniversary of the United States. And it's a country that has to look in the mirror every day and ask itself, which version of freedom and justice for all are we going with this time?
Out here in Montreal, you're still connected to what's going on. I guess, what do you feel? And clearly you've shown that, with the U.S. consulate here, there's clearly an ICE presence here. A lot of Canadian rioters, activists have been pointing out Canadian complicity, right, in this kind of, in the maintenance of the paramilitary group, ICE. There are Rochelle armored vehicles from a company out in Brampton that kind of sell those vehicles to ICE. I believe they ordered 20 more of those vehicles for $10 million. We have as well Hootsuite based in Vancouver, right, who gives social media services to DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, which ICE is part of. And here in Montreal, we have Garda World. And I'm kind of Garda World being a private security firm that they're an American subsidiary, does lots of business with ICE. And I guess I want to ask you, despite being separated by this imaginary border, clearly we're connected. And I guess I want to know from you, what do you think is the responsibilities of Montrealers and Canadians at large to opposing something like ICE?
Yeah, I think that's a question, the answer to which a lot of folks might be surprised by, in the sense that I think actually Canadians have one of the largest responsibilities to upholding a higher moral standard. Because historically, Canada is a country founded on in anti-revolutionary sentiment. If we think about the United States being founded on a revolutionary sentiment in opposition to the crown,
right,
and Canada being identified counter to that as a country really built in allegiance to the crown.
Right. Tons of loyalists settled areas around Montreal.
Yep. That allegiance to the crown has in many ways unfolded over Canada's history in a way that has produced, and this is very broadly speaking, of course, right? I would never say that Canada is free of the kinds of ills that the United States is. But there is a greater sense of common good in Canada than I think there is in the United States, which is very outwardly and expressly focused on individualism, on this notion of the American dream, lift yourself up by your bootstraps, yourself up by your bootstraps, right? You can make it on your own. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, the Horatio Alger story. Whereas Canada is far more rooted in this notion of community, the neighbor. People still stand in line to get on the bus here. And I don't say still, I mean, like, they do that. We do that now. And so for Canada to sort of meet the moment by doing similar things in any way would be, I think, a huge betrayal of the Canadian proximity to community that we see at the macro level in Canada, but not necessarily in similar ways at the macro level in the United States.
I'm curious. So you locate this, I guess, more collective or communal spirit with not having revolted against the British. I'm kind of curious about that the framing of that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, so how does that? How can I clarify that better? There was the American Revolution was founded on taxation without representation, right? The British Crown insisting on taxing folks in what then was the 13 colonies without their consent, without their contribution. And so the United States said, or the folks in the colonies at the time said, no, we're not okay with that. We're going to fight you to the death to be able to control our own economy. And this notion that you can come here and you can, manifest your destiny and make out of yourself whatever you want.
Okay, sure. Right.
Whereas then north of what is now the U.S.-Canadian border, folks said, we're okay with that, right? And took a sort of like global, or rather like Canada, UK collective Commonwealth approach to their economic stance at that time, which, if my history serves me correctly, was about the greater good in the moment. And so I'm not a historian, but that's how I
interpret that. Yeah,
generally
I understand. Right. You have this. I mean, I think you're right about there being this real rampant kind of individualism, right, in the
For
States
sure.
that kind of atomizes populations and I guess creates this desire for I guess a more perfect bubble or a more perfect ethno society, right? That would cause people to want to kick out anyone who might be black or brown or Asian, as it were.
What I couldn't tell you though is why the Twin Cities have become as community centered as they have. I think that part of it is a reaction to the violence that has been meted out upon us. When people are collectively under attack, and have a clear enemy, it brings them together. But beyond that, the history of the Twin Cities is not a history I'm familiar with enough to be able to say, oh, this, or this happened, or these groups or those groups are there for X, Y, or Z reason, and this has contributed.
Sure. Where do you think things are heading? I know before you said you're not prescient, but I'm curious where your hopes lie.
I mean, my hopes are always with a more peaceful future. I would say eventually, through a peaceful process or a violent one, I think we're going to, at some point, realize that there has to be a global system rather than a nation-by-nation system of unifying terms of agreement, whether you want to call it law and order or not. I do think that we have to be headed more towards a place where we see each other as a human race and are comfortable with culture existing differently within that human race.
Right, of course.
As opposed to saying, nope, this is my land and these are my borders and I'm going to decide that I conquered it outright and fair and square and now it's, the white man's land or what have you. That to me just seems completely unsustainable. I don't know how we can get to a place where in the face of climate change and catastrophic environmental destruction, we can continue to be as divided as we are.
Before you mentioned how yourself and your friend who helped co-organize this ICE Out protest were involved in other social justice struggles. And I'm kind of curious how you connect other struggles to this one about ICE.
I mean, I'm a firm believer that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If what's the saying? If one of us is chained, none of us are free. I don't think that's the exact.
No, I think you got the spirit. You got the spirit there, yeah.
Precisely because if you look at the ways in which, you mentioned Rochelle, you mentioned Garda World, Hootsuite. I mean, there's also Canadian economic ties to Lockheed Martin, Boeing, global corporations that fund the U.S. military industrial complex. There were Canadian troops in Afghanistan when the U.S. decided to invade and, do what it did there. The U.S. and Canada has for a long time had this military partnership. And so I think that when you consider even just those ties, you start to understand that these movements are linked in a way that is not about race per se in the end, but is about not about race alone in the end, but about class consciousness. It's about the powerful versus the powerless. And that's why we can very confidently in any movement say all power to the people, right? If you boil it down to that base level of understanding and move up from there to see where truly you follow the money, see where the money takes you, by and large, you're gonna get back to the same folks trying to achieve the same aims most of the time, which is to pad their pockets and secure their own positions of power.
Right. I guess one last question is, What would you suggest for people in Montreal who are feeling powerless amidst all this violence committed by ICE?
You know what? One thing that makes what's happening in the Twin Cities so powerful, as you mentioned, is the degree of organization happening, right? I was, along with Lynn and the organizing groups involved, able to pull together one protest. But I think if you're interested in being involved, if you're interested in contributing to the resistance, try to seek out a way where you can do so without creating static, right? We want to make clear noise. We want to project sound into the broader landscape that has one voice. Mm-hmm. And I think right now, particularly with social media, there's a lot of people saying a lot of things, some of which are important, some of which are confusing, some of which are well-informed, some of which are misinformation or disinformation, depending on who's speaking it out and their intentions. And so that would be my recommendation. Find the organizers and ask how you can support movements that are ongoing so as to strengthen them and not just create more noise or more confusion in an already very densely populated space.
I really like that image of whether or not like this voice is contributing to something larger, like some harmony that's already trying to happen or building up versus just adding to the background noise. That's a really wonderful kind of metaphor. Thank you very much, Michael. Yeah. Everyone, that was Michael Lipset, organizer of the ICE Out protest that happened on February 1st, joining me, Kalden Dhatsenpa, here on Local 514. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you, Michael, again for coming onto our show.
Thank you so much.